appreciate you doing this for us. It took a while. We were trying to get you before the Liberal leadership, but here we are in your hometown. What's it like to be back?
Well, it's great. It's always great to go home, and pleasure to be in Fort Smith any time of the year. Last time I was here was 2009, I think. It was just after. It was during the financial crisis, and it was probably during March or so. So it was wasn't green like this, but it's great to be back, and we've got a lot on, and that time was a time of crisis and Canada getting through that. We've got a different set of challenges now that are coming again from outside of our borders, and we've got a lot of options to address it and build out, and that's part of why I'm here.
Well, you made a couple of stops today, one at the community center.
Yep.
I believe her name was Connie, greeted you with a sign saying, "We love you, Mark, but you scrap Bill C5." Is that something you've been hearing a lot?
No, actually. It was nice of Connie to come out with a sign with a couple of people, but no, I haven't heard a lot, and we spent last week, well, a couple of things. One, last week met with physically over 250 First Nations chiefs, Grand Chiefs.
In particular, after Alberta said
virtually
they
there
would
were
do their
there were
own
more
provincial assessment.
there, another
First
50,
Nations
75,
Summit
I guess,
currently
as
taking
well,
place,
to talk through the beginnings
for
of the
Alberta,
approach going
which is-
forward, what C5 does. And all it does at this stage is it makes things possible. The question is, what do we want to do? What do we want to do together? And we started, the first thing we did in the question of what do we want to do together is meeting with Indigenous leadership. I'm going to, as you know, I'm going to Inuvik later today, and we'll be meeting with all the leadership of Inuit Nunagat, the rights holders, modern treaty leadership, to talk about what's possible, what they want to do. And I think that's the important point. Sometimes you need to create the conditions, and that's what we've done, is to create the conditions for possibilities. And then the question is, what are people for? It's a big country. We've got lots of opportunity, and the question of which of those do we want to pursue?
I guess depending on who you were listening to, the First Nations Summit has been panned a little. Some walked out. The youth couldn't make it in. Some were saying, ministers were the ones doing all the talking. I guess what is your take on how the summit went?
It went very well, and I will tell you that the number of rights holders, the number of Grand Chiefs that came directly to me with specific proposals that have followed up with us on specific ideas is immense. And again, we're going to focus where people want to do things,
right,
where people are for. Understand that and it's true, Dennis, in any time. There are projects that seem good to some people but are bad for others, or projects that aren't ready, or ideas that aren't fully developed. And it's really going to be around what are people really enthusiastic and what helps to build nations. And when I say, I add the S for a reason. Building, of course, Canada, but building in a new way with First Nations. And this is really the first time we've had a signature piece of federal legislation that has at the heart of it economic growth for Indigenous peoples. And that's the possibility. Now the job for leadership, myself included, but I'm only one of many. The premiers, the leaders of the rights holders, as I say, the modern treaty leaders, to work with what do we want to do.
What in Mark Carney's mind is a major project that this country needs right now?
Well, so I'm going to answer that in a different way, if you don't mind, which is that I don't have a preset notion on a specific project that we must do. But what we did in the legislation is sort of define the elements of, well, what does build a nation? And there's 5 elements, and one of them is, of course, it advances Canada's economic interests. It makes us stronger, makes us more resilient. And we know because of the crisis coming from south of the border, that's one of the things we need to do. But secondly, and crucially, these are projects that are in the interests of Indigenous peoples, that are aligned with their interests. And that shows you what the process has to be, because it has to come up from those groups. And the third big thing, the third big element that is very clearly in the legislation and will be in the approach, is that it aligns with the country's climate goals, so that it's moving us, the projects are moving us forward. Now, not every project will move us forward as much as other projects, but I'll give you an example, and I'm fresh from, as you may know, from meeting with the premiers, the first ministers yesterday, including the premier of the Northwest Territories, who very kindly came from that to be here today. And one of the things we talked about was raised by the premier of BC and the premier of Yukon, is how can they, and that what they want to do is connect the hydro grid, so the zero emission grid from BC into the Yukon, and in doing so, obviously it brings power to homes and people there and clean power, but what it also does is it creates the possibility to develop critical mineral deposits, to diversify our economy, to give longer term jobs, and there's a series of projects that are linked in there. We're in the Northwest Territories. I'll give another example. Again, doesn't come from us. I'm going to hear about this, I'm sure, from the leaders of Inuit Nunagat tomorrow, which is Grays Bay Point. So this, for those who aren't familiar with it, is in Nunavut, Grays Bay. It is a potential new port, but the key thing about the port is it links and opens up opportunity in Nunavut, but as well in the Northwest Territories for economic development, for links and transportation corridor up into that. It creates the possibility that we build new relationships with Europeans, which provides some diversification from our exposure to the Americans. It's a very exciting project. Now, we will potentially support that, provided it has the full support of the Indigenous peoples all the way along the corridor. It seems to have a lot of support, but we've got to make sure that it's there, provided that we can see the broader economic benefits. We don't want to build a port and nothing flows through it, and that we get some private sector money to make sure that it's not just the Canadian taxpayer that's paying.
Coming out of that meeting, an MOU between Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, they want to see a pipeline from Alberta to Ontario. Manitoba didn't sign on to that.
I was going to say, last time I checked my,
Premier Wabkadu saying, that we haven't consulted with Indigenous peoples about this.
Yeah,
yet.
yeah. I think that, this is an important point. And I tell you, Dennis, this is something that came up over and over in the election campaign. It's part of the reason why I'm careful about saying certain projects. Because Energy East is a name for a pipeline going across the country. It was a proposal of more than a decade ago. You're familiar with it. A number of people watching are familiar with it. And I get asked, are you going to support it? I'm like, well, it's not my decision. There's the provinces. There are the series of First Nations that would be affected by it. Then there's, who's going to buy there's lots of potential advantages to a project like that. But people have to be behind that. And part of the question is, if not that, what else might they be behind? And I'll give an example, if I may. And Premier Canoe, he said this publicly and had discussions with him yesterday about this. One of the things that he looks at, and again, this is about building the country, is what's called a coast-to-coast-to-coast energy corridor, which links from Manitoba through to BC, up through the Northwest Territories, Yukon, and a spur to Yukon, and then to Nunavut. And, and also does in a way, and this is, again, part of their thinking, Manitoba government's thinking, which I'm very supportive of, is in a way where there is Indigenous ownership from the start and at the core of the corporation that would help to build this. Now, I'm going to use that as a chance to make a point, which one of the signature elements of our approach, the federal government's approach on these nation-building projects, has been, yes, aligned with the interests of Indigenous people. Great. It has to be much more than just being aligned. It has to be that there is large equity ownership in these projects. And one of the things we will do is to basically finance that equity ownership because we don't want to have a situation where something's in the interests of the rights holders or modern treaty groups in their interests, but they don't have the money to help make it happen. And that's part of the way we can help. but it always starts with what's in their interest and what do they want to do.
One specific project that comes up often is the Ring of Fire in Ontario, Northern Ontario. Premier Doug Ford willing to drive his own bulldozer up there. He says, I've been reporting on the Ring of Fire for almost 20 years now. I don't think it's any further along than it was back then. Multinational companies have died during that time over that project. You have 2 nations or so that are supportive of it, but you have about 7 or 9 that are around there now that have filed legal challenges against this legislation.
Yeah, look, I think there's a real lesson in some of these situations. I mean, in some cases it can be a specific project, and I'm not saying the Ring of Fire is a bad project, but in other cases it's been an attitude which says we'll move forward with a project at all costs, or even if everyone else isn't on side. That's not the attitude I take. I take the attitude of let's find the projects that people are getting behind. Let's make sure that they aren't just supportive of it and it isn't just jobs at the time that whatever the project is being built. It's in ongoing jobs, but it's ongoing economic interests as true owners. And that's what's possible. Now there are models for the Ring of Fire that could work that way. There is not a model that doesn't work that way, to put it in the double negative if I can. Right. The federal government won't be involved if it's not working that way. If it doesn't have the support, doesn't have the equity ownership. And look, let's see what's possible on those terms, and then we can see things move forward, or whether or not things move forward. I don't think things are going to move forward. In fact, they are not. Certainly with the federal government, they're not going to move forward unless they have those elements.
Are you concerned that this is just one legal challenge? Are you concerned that once these projects are made public, that financing starts going into them, that they'll be met with further lawsuits or blockades?
Look, again, it's a question of who you have behind. If you're building out an energy corridor, energy and trade corridor to Grays Bay Point, it's on my mind because of where we are. If we're doing that, then you've got to have lined up that support for it. Now, who's going to challenge it? If you have the support of those who are affected. I mean, yes, somebody, people can always launch lawsuits, but the question is, do you have the positive support? And Dennis, I'm going to emphasize this. This is an enormous vista that we've got here. It is an absolutely enormous country with tremendous potential and opportunities. We have done too little, not too much. And what I hear directly from rights holders, directly from chiefs across the country, is a bunch of great ideas.
Right.
Okay? We haven't even started the consultation process about which projects are. But I'm aware of, and we're aware of huge, huge potential. My job, the job of the premiers, the job of others, is to convert those great ideas as part of a process to making decisions after extensive consultations that these are the potential projects of national interest, and then to go from that to attach the right conditions around the development of those projects, and including environmental, local services and economic benefits, ownership conditions, other elements. Attach those conditions, labor conditions as well, so those projects can be built, and that process goes forward. One thing we're committed to as the federal government, the new federal government, is we will do our work in a timely way. When those conditions start to come together, we're not going to be the one that delays the thing for 10 or 15 years. I'm afraid we have been the ones that have delayed good ideas for 10 or 15 years. And that's part of what we're going to stop.
Any of those ones that were delayed for 10 and 15 years come to mind that you'd like to resurrect?
I'm giving you the same answer, but that's because it's the part of the approach. It's for others to advocate and support. Because if it's not, the federal government is not pulling projects. We're not trying to create projects. We're not trying to push certain ideas and priorities. But what we're going to do is we're going to accelerate and reinforce and support those projects that really do have support. And, it's interesting. I mean, you've asked on a variety of things, but sometimes this whole thing gets reduced down to pipelines.
Yeah.
No, we're talking about, yes, pipelines. But ports, we're talking about green energy, we're talking about carbon capture, we're talking potentially about data centers and artificial intelligence. We're talking about in Northwest Territories, right here, one of the nation building projects potentially, and the Premier's been an advocate for this, and again, the Premier is being very careful and others are being very careful to see whether there is the support of the rights holders, but is Mackenzie Valley Highway to Norman Wells. Which actually brings economic benefit, it brings direct social benefit, I can put it that way, and you know, it can help with our national security as well. So it's a wide range of potential projects, and that's what's exciting about it. We won't be able to do everything, to state the obvious, and or at least not everything immediately. So we're setting up a process where things are positively advocated, they've got support, and then we get behind them and move them forward.
Here's a project that was pitched by the national chief, and that was closing the infrastructure gap for First Nations. 600+ billion, hundreds, thousands of jobs could go into that. Is that in the national interest?
It's certainly a response. I'd reframe it. It's a responsibility. It's a responsibility to provide health, social services, to have the infrastructure across this country at comparable levels. That's a different. That is a different set of responsibilities, different set of processes for that.
Mr. Prime Minister, I'm being told we got to wrap up. We didn't even make it to our bench. Maybe one day we'll sit on it.
Someday we'll make it to the bench. I see these good people down there, though.
Yeah,
but
I'll
thank
let
you,
go
Dennis.
meet them. Thanks so much for your
Thanks.
time.
A real
Appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.